Berenbaum, director of the Siggy Ziering Institute at American Jewish University. Michael was instrumental in the creation of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, as well as in the making of One Survivor Remembers. Please join me in welcoming Michael Berenbaum.
First of all, it's a pleasure to be here and a privilege. I had thought that I was going to follow Gera, and that was an impossible task. But I want you to understand that you've only heard a glimpse of Gera. Part of what Kerry and I said many years ago, and part of what I've written and part of what he's written, is that when we saw Gera on the screen, we understood our responsibility, which was to let talent do its deed and just get out of the way. And the most important thing we did in making that film, and Kerry did, was to understand that you didn't have to add drama. You merely had to have the drama come forth from the words of a woman who was eloquent, who was startling, and who did stuff that no director, with all due respect to actors, that no director could have ever asked her to do. When she speaks about 1942 on the eve of deportation, and she said she was thinking, maybe we should have done what that other family did. We should have taken our lives. And my father came up to me and he put his hands around my neck. And her neck bulges, and she puts her hands around the neck, and then she said, he said to her, promise me you'll never do that. You can feel how deep and how profound is that moment, and how much enabled her much later in life to speak to children who were on the edge of suicide, to those who had reached the absolute bottom. And why it was that after the horrible events of Columbine, with all the people who wanted to assist, there was one person who could speak most deeply and most eloquently to those students and to their needs, to their sorrow, and to their loss, to their despair, and even how hope can grow out of despair. And that was Gera Klein. And she came not once, she came not twice, she came again and again and again. The story of Gera, you know, it's the story of separation from parents, from children, the last night, deportation by train, and then the moment that you've heard of, the death marches. And Gera put the death marches most eloquently. We took our first step, and we didn't know if it was a step to liberation or death. And so we marched. You saw the moment of liberation. 68 pounds, she hadn't had a bath in 3 years. And Kurt Klein could perceive in that woman the beauty that was within that woman. And he saw in that moment, and she says it beautifully, he opened the door for me. And he said, would you please precede me? A term of address we had not heard, a gesture we had not seen, and even the smallest gesture restored. She came to the United States, and she did the great heroism of survivors and their resilience and their integrity. She began the difficult task of acculturating to new surroundings, to bringing children into the world. And she began to tell her story. I met Gera years before I had come to work on the museum, when I was but a teenager and heard her tell the story for the first time. And it was at that point that she began the task of bearing witness, and bore witness in order to underscore the need for the State of Israel, the joy of the State of Israel, the pride of the State of Israel, the majesty of the State of Israel. And I've seen Gera only deepen those commitments over these many years. Kerry, you know very well how that story got in the museum. We had a team that was looking for eloquent survivors in order to conclude the museum's story. And they looked at this and they said, this is the ending. And if you know about a film and if you know about a museum, if you have the beginning and you have the ending, the only thing you can't do in between is to screw up. And that became the ending, and in fact, if we were to do it today, we would have to say that that's not the ending. It's not what happened at the moment of liberation. It's far more deeply, far more profoundly, what you've done with the opportunity that survival afforded. Look at Gerda as an example. She is no better, and perhaps that's true, but she is the embodiment of what happened. She used her experience to speak to human dignity and to speak to human decency, to combat hunger, to speak against despair, to offer hope where people were bereft of hope, to teach against indifference, and to argue on behalf of humanity. Her latest endeavor, which is Citizenship Counts, is to remind us that this is a nation of immigrants, immigrants who became patriots, who came here with identities that were fragmented and from far-off lands, and who forged an identity, a proud identity, a dignified identity, a hopeful identity, a free identity as Americans. She's done it with modesty, she's done it with integrity, she's done it with depth, she's done it with passion. There's a feeling in my sense of being of deja vu all over again, to quote Yogi Berra. And that is that I began my association with the museum in 1979. I was the first employee of the then President's Commission on the Holocaust. I opened the doors. To give you a sense of it, my 33-year-old son was then 4 months old. I was there for a very intense year, left and then had the great, great honor of coming back and finally getting it done. The deal I had with my colleagues was I'm responsible for everything that's wrong. They rightfully assume credit for everything that's right, but somebody had to step up to the plate. Our challenge was to take the tortured memories of a bereaved community, to move them to the center of American national life, and to say that they had something to say, not only about the past, but about the core American values and about our collective future as humanity. The questions then is, could it be done? Will they be interested? Will they come? If they come once, will they ever return? And could it be done in Washington? There was a deeper question. It was a question that stuck at the core of the American Jewish community. Would Jews be self-confident enough, bold enough, to tell a story that's centered on Jews in the heart of the nation's capital, surrounded by all the great museums and all the great memorials that form the core of the national identity? Could we do it in such an inclusive way so that this would be regarded as a national treasure for all Americans and not a special pleading for one group? We learned the lesson of the Fields of Dream. If you build it, they will come. You've heard Mark Twain always said there is truth, lies, and statistics. You've heard the statistics. 32.9 million people visited the museum by October. That's essentially 2 million people a year. 34% of them are school-age children, which means that school-age children will continue to come again and again and again. 12% are international, 9 out of 10 are non-Jewish. 96 heads of state, more than 3,500 foreign officials from over 132 countries. And between July and September alone, 5,500 people heard a survivor volunteer speak. You've heard a little bit about the vitality of the program. I'm going to tell you about my experience of its vitality from the outside. If you entered the museum, you'd see a permanent exhibition, but you'd also see a gallery that contains the state of deception on the power of propaganda and shows you in a very deep and very profound way how dangerous it is to put lies out into the world and to repeat them again and again and again. If you went down to the Gonda Center on the concourse, you would see an exhibition that I'm ashamed to say is necessary. It's an exhibition that one could have never imagined would be necessary. It's an exhibition on a document that everybody knew was false, that everybody knew was fraudulent, that everybody thought was dead, but we had to present an exhibition on the protocols of the elders of Zion. And when I say that, I have tears in my eyes because I'm ashamed of the collective world in which we live. If you went down, you would see photographs from the aftermath of Srebrenica. If you went further along, you would see meeting the challenge of genocide, the Nuremberg trials, what is justice, and the genocide emergency of our world in Darfur in Sudan. You'd see, if you went throughout the nation, traveling exhibitions. And the museum is not only for those who come to the museum, but it's also for those who reach out to the museum. As you know, I work on books and movies, so I'm in the very unique position of saying that I was one of the creators of the archives, and now one of its leading consumers, and hopefully one of its more prolific producers. Information is contained there, photographs, essential for every film. I spent this afternoon reviewing its oral history collection to understand how we can approach Treblinka, a camp in which 900,000 Jews were murdered, which had less than 100 survivors, which the entire city of Warsaw was destroyed in which the entire community of Macedonia was destroyed without even a survivor. Sarah told you that the museum archive is available, the museum website is available in languages like Farsi and like Arabic. And I was in Morocco this past summer meeting with students, hearing a Holocaust conference, not a Holocaust denial conference, but a Holocaust conference in Morocco because students wanted to learn this history precisely because it is denigrated and precisely because they felt they had to discover their own truth. And what did we see? We were able to point them to a website which offered resources in their language that were all-encompassing. The museum has become, as you've heard, a moral force. Years ago, the late Hyman Bookbinder, one of the legends of Washington, said, we got to do something about genocide. And he invented a word which I've now come to disagree with, but not a concept. He said we need a committee on conscience because we have to remind people of goodwill that if we essentially call attention to genocide as it is erupting, they will do something about it. Little did we know then that we'd live in a world of CNN and the internet where you see genocide, you can experience it as it is happening, and the issue is not conscience, the issue is will, and essentially the issue is what are you going to do now to combat it? The museum became the stage for moral discourse in the nation. The first year, we had a program in which Madeleine Albright appealed for action on Yugoslavia during the beginning of the genocide that took place in that tortured land. We had a debate between two views of the essential basis of humanity. And we've endeavored for 30 years, to rescue the evidence and rescue the artifacts before they went off to oblivion. Survivors had a dream. They wanted to live in a world in which the Holocaust would be remembered. I'll tell you now that I would like to live in a world where the Holocaust can be forgotten, where genocide and the threat of genocide do not blot the earth, where anti-Semitism is confined to the past, not to the present and the future, where the threats to annihilate the Jewish people and other people do not exist. And we discovered something very interesting and very important about how to combat Holocaust denial. We learned how to respond to it by elevating the issue, by responding not by entering into the depths of stupid discussions, but by layering out evidence, document after document, piece of testimony after piece of testimony, by raising the issue. I'm concerned about Holocaust trivialization, because we live in a culture that trivializes many things, and what I'm proud of with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum is that it sets the standard of excellence in what it does. It doesn't become trite or trivial. It elevates, it deepens. We live at a time of transformation. And let's face it, frankly, we see it even with Goethe's illness. We're at the verge of a time when we're moving from lived memory to historical memory. And at that moment in time, the institutionalization of memory is all important. The Holocaust has become, over the last 30 years, not more important, not less important in the decades in which the museum has existed. We see its implications for medicine. We see its implications in the docket when people from Rwanda, from Cambodia, from Darfur, and from Bosnia are brought to justice. We see it in religious ethics when religions try to find that within their own tradition that allows them to embrace the other, to regard the other as brother and not as infidel or enemy. And we see it also in the world of responsibility for serious intervention when mass inhumanity occurs. Scholars of the Holocaust insist that the Holocaust was an atrocity, not a tragedy. In tragedy, what is learned roughly balances the price that's paid for such knowledge. Atrocity offers no such possibility of balance, and thus no inner space in which to bury the event. At most, it leaves us searching through the ashes to find meaning in an event of such magnitude that it defies our very meaning. 66 2/3 years ago, 2/3 of a century after the event, some nations have settled into a comfortable understanding of a disquieting past, and the Holocaust reminds them that they're too comfortable, reminds them of their own inner history, which they have to confront. It reminds banks of what banks did not do right. It reminds bystanders of when they were perpetrators and not only bystanders. Reminds a nation of France that it was not only a nation of resistance, but it was a nation of collaboration. Industries have been forced to confront the degree to which they cooperated and benefit from the German confiscation of Jewish property, banking, insurance, even the high cultural areas of art. And we've seen with Marilyn and what Marilyn's done with Recovered Voices, the degree to which music was suppressed and great art was not allowed to be performed by the highest cultural institutions in the world. And we've seen the legal implications of the Holocaust. I went many years ago, in the immediate aftermath of the genocide in Rwanda. I went to Rwanda. In fact, I know the date because I was in Rwanda when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. I went to Rwanda and they wanted two answers to deep questions. They didn't want to speak to me, they wanted to speak to survivors. What they want to know from survivors is, what do you do the morning after you've survived genocide? How do you rebuild from the ashes? How do you live among your killers? How do you bring children into a world in which you've seen death and destruction? And they also asked the great question, how do you rebuild society? How do you get the skeleton of justice, the scaffolding of civilization, when all civilization has been destroyed? What role does the Holocaust play in memory in the current world? In a world of relativism, it's taken the place as the absolute. We don't know what's good, we don't know what's bad, but we know that the Holocaust is evil, absolute evil. It is for that reason that people use it in the plural as they attempt to call attention to their own anguish and to their own suffering. Consciousness of the Holocaust has moved beyond the Jewish community, way beyond the Jewish community. In the past century, half-century, the bereaved memories of parochial community have been transformed into an act of conscience. Survivors have responded most deeply in the most Jewish of ways by remembering suffering and transmitting the memory in order to fortify conscience, to plead for decency, to strengthen values, and to intensify a commitment to human dignity. They had a model. This is how biblical Jews and the tradition that followed remembered the Exodus. We don't remember the Exodus to speak about evil. We remember the Exodus to speak about the responsibility of living as free human beings. We don't remember the Holocaust solely to speak about evil. We remember the Holocaust in order to fortify decency, to speak against bullying, to speak against self-destruction, to speak against hatred. Holocaust survivors were a small minority of the victims. Many more were murdered than survived. They faced the question, what do you do with the accident of survival? Over time, they came to an answer, why did I survive? Not by a statement about the past, but what they did with the life of the aftermath. You saw it. Because they have faced death, many have learned what is most important in life, life itself, love, family, community, and what the Holocaust survivor and Academy Award winner Gera Klein called the simple blessing of a boring evening at home. The small things, the simple things we have taken for granted cannot be taken for granted. They must be appreciated and cherished anew. For Jewish survivors, the survivor of the Jewish people has become paramount. The final statement of Jewish history and Jewish memory must be about life and not about death, and no matter how pervasive that death. Survival required empowerment in Israel, a state, and an army. For survivors like Gerda and her husband Kurt, bearing witness conferred a sense of meaning in the aftermath of atrocity. They have told the story of the past and kept the promise to those that they left behind. More importantly, they have told the story of the past in the hope that it can transform the future. One cannot undo what has happened. Historians can answer the simple question, how? Theologians, writers, poets, and philosophers have not answered the question, why? Yet we can answer the question of what to do with this history. Embrace it, study it, wrestle with it, and ultimately transform it into a weapon for the human spirit to enlarge our sense of responsibility, to alleviate human suffering, to strengthen moral resolve. The great achievement of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, its greatest achievement, is that it has become the institutional embodiment of those all-important values. There are two things that you must do. One is easy, and the other is equally important. Easy is on the way out, courtesy of HBO. You must pick up a copy of One Survivor Remembers the film. And if you pick it up, you must make a promise, which is, it's 38 minutes. Kerry was very insistent that we make it less than a classroom period. 38 minutes, you must see it. For those of you who have children, your children must see it, and it can be seen by children of virtually all ages. And for those of you who have grandchildren who are above the age of 9 or 10, they must see it. And it's a gift of this evening that will be enjoy a cherished place in your home. And the second thing you must do is very simply, there are cards in the center of the table. You have heard of what this institution does. You've been asked to assume your responsibility for this sacred task. We are ennobled by the task, and you can be our partners. Thank you very much.